just to flip it clear, Joe. It kind of has.
What's that? I don't know, watch with
What's that?
That.
Open time is 3 o'clock. I'd like to call this special meeting of the Southwest Community Water and Sewer District to order. Please call the roll.
Mr. Steph?
Here.
Mr. Platt?
Here.
Mr. Pretzler?
Here. We are going to have a pledge of allegiance first. If you'll rise and join me and remove your hats. You got them? I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We have an agenda before us with basically one item on it. I'll move to approve the agenda as it's presented. Have a second from Mr. Platt. Please call the roll.
Mr. Steph?
Yes.
Mr. Platt?
Yes.
Mr. Pretzler?
Yes. Public comments. I'm not going to restrict them to now. If we have some questions later on, we'll let the public ask them too, but within time limits. The agenda is approved. Are there any public comments? Okay, I'd like to turn the floor over to Mr. Raffatellis. I'm sorry, I didn't mention that.
My name's Joe Crea.
Joe Krieger. Would you please?
Absolutely, thank you. Appreciate the time to talk with you all today. What we wanted to review here is a little bit of just overview of kind of the project that we're getting close to completing our rate study. So I want to go over some of the initial project objectives and what we set out to do. We'll lay a little bit of foundation just around financial policies and the overall process that we went through. But really want to primarily focus on sort of our results for the financial plan and rate analysis, and also the capacity fee, tap fee review that we did as well. So that's our plan. As I go through, certainly feel free to interrupt me with any questions or comments. Keep this as conversational as possible. Just to remind everyone, our primary scope involved 3 main points. First was the rate study. And we know that, RCAP had come in and done an analysis, so it was a bit of an evaluation of that and a little bit of just a refresh to make sure we confirmed and agreed with their findings. And you'll see we have a few adjustments to that. And then the capacity fee study, where we look at, new customers, making sure that growth pays for growth and are our fees appropriately set. And then, of course, is documenting all of that work. And so this is sort of a part of that. And then we'll be following up with more final report kind of documentation as well. Just to kind of get it out there to begin with, what did we do differently than the RCAP study? You'll see some results from our rate recommendations that are a little bit different than the RCAP recommendation, I think, to the positive. And in our position, Raffatellis, we are municipal, registered municipal advisors, so we have a little bit more complexity and ability to develop a more nuanced financial plan for your capital projects. So that helps give us a little bit of an advantage to explore different options. So that's one thing. And part of that is understanding, how we can use our existing cash reserves to offset future capital improvements, and also kind of augment that with new development and new revenues from new development. So those are the big ones. And then when we looked at the RCAP study, their rates, the way that they recommended those, there was sort of a pretty clearly defined contribution to various proposed reserves that may or may not fully recognize your existing cash position. So that was sort of driving some of those initial large rate increases that we saw. And then they're also sort of targeting generating a 2 to 3% margin on the net system cash flow, which is a good policy, but it can lead to kind of showing a higher rate than needed if we have reserves that we can leverage for certain purposes. So what is a rate study? How do we do it at Raffatellis? So we've usually got these kind of 5 big picture steps. The first is to kind of make sure we're identifying the objectives from a financial and rate perspective of the organization of the district. We want to confirm and review the financial policies of the district to make sure that they are set in a way that you will kind of have strong fiscal management over the 5, 10, 20-year period that we're looking at. Develop a plan that supports those policies and allows us to reinvest in our capital infrastructure and fund all of our operating expenses. And then once we have that plan, design rates to bring in the revenues we need, and that includes the tap fees and capacity fees. And then at the end, it's kind of, okay, let's take a step back and make sure, did we kind of accomplish the things that we really set out to at the beginning. So when we talk about objectives, from a rate perspective, really what we like to think about is that our rates and our charges are one of the primary ways that we can communicate with our customers on a month-to-month basis, because that's how many people interact with the district. Is they get a bill and this is what we're going to, and the way we set those rates can send different signals. We can signal, for efficient use of water resources by having a strong price signal for people that use a lot of water. We can promote equity among customer classes by having, 74 different customer groups, and every rate is specifically tailored to, Arby's and McDonald's. They pay a different rate. There's different ways that you can build rates that are all within the commonly accepted industry practice and target some of these different objectives. So as we talk with staff, the important things here that we understand are, economic development is clearly a big driver in the region, but having stable revenue is certainly important, and also equity among customers, and that means, growth paying for growth as well. Is that development is certainly happening in Central Ohio, and we want to make sure that kind of new growth supports itself, and it's not the existing customers subsidizing that development. And so those were some of the key things that we focused on as we went through the study. In terms of financial policies, they really are kind of the foundation of building a financial plan and doing a rate study. They provide that strategic long-term information that we can kind of make decisions against. So we want to promote strong fiscal management. And really there's a few different elements to this, but the three big ones that I like to focus on, the first are kind of cash reserves. We like to recommend, depending on the utility, anywhere from 120 days of operating expenses on hand up to, sometimes 360 days of operating cash on hand, depending on the situation. For the district, we think 120 days is appropriate, given your scale and the kind of financial challenges you've got ahead of you in terms of increasing operating costs, increasing pressures. In addition, we like to kind of have a separate fund for a capital reserve, and these are similar to what RCAP kind of mentioned. We've targeted about 1/3 of the average future capital spend from an annual basis as our target level there. And what's important is that these are targets. They're kind of guidelines. They are not meant to be hard and fast minimums or maximums. We want to be in this range, and when we're in this range, we're thinking effectively, and we're kind of going to have the flexibility to run the district in a responsible manner. The other couple elements relate to borrowing and debt. Debt coverage is just simply how much extra revenue are we bringing in any given year relative to what we have to pay for principal and interest. Since the district's debt is all state loans, we don't have publicly, revenue bonds or GO bonds that we're kind of holding. We don't have a legal debt requirement to maintain. So this is a bit of a best practice, 1.15 times coverage. So that means if your debt payment was $10 million, just to make the math easy, we would want to have, I made the math hard for myself, 1.15 times that, so $10,150,000, or let me get it wrong, 11 million.
Yeah. Closer.
See, attorney math.
That's
I'm
right.
on board.
Yeah.
What would it be if it was publicly financed? Would it just go up to 1.25? Is it just 25%?
So the total would stay the same, but what would happen is if you issued revenue bonds, they would be issued at like a senior indenture. So they're going to get, if something goes wrong, you're going to pay them first before you pay the state. And typically there's two levels there. So the senior would be 1.5 times coverage, or 1.4, it kind of depends. So you want to have extra cushion on your senior debt, and then your total debt is you've got smaller buffer. And then the debt to asset ratio, that's just kind of making sure we don't over leverage the assets. So we want to try to keep that below 50%, long term. And then we, use those policies to develop our financial plan. The financial plan is really looking at revenues that we have coming into the system. How do we forecast those revenues to change over the next few years, and balancing that against what do we have to spend that money on. We've got our operating costs for all of our staff, for all of our chemicals, supplies, energy, everything, you name it. We have to pay back our debt that we've already incurred and that we're kind of holding. We have to borrow new money to pay for the capital plan. So all of that gets kind of baked into that multi-year financial plan and financial forecast, where we can see that are our current revenues sufficient to recover the revenue we need, and if they're not, what type of rate adjustment or fee adjustment can help us support those costs going forward. So that's kind of the little bit of the foundation, the background of what we did. Then we'll get into some of the specific information for what we found. Overall, the district is very well positioned from a financial perspective. We know we're heading into a period of growth and substantial capital investment. So that's where we want to be. We're not behind the eight ball. We've got flexibility to kind of manage the system. We have strong cash reserves right now. Those have been built up over the past 5 years or so, maybe a little bit longer, but through some of the tap fees that we've collected through the user charge revenues. Those are going to allow us to sort of balance those capital investments as we go forward. So we don't have to borrow for everything. We can use the cash that we have to help finance some of our projects and avoid, again, over leveraging our system. We have revenues that are coming in right now, and that gives us enough to support that renewal and replacement of infrastructure. And it also allows us to kind of continue to make those expansion related projects and support that in a responsible way, so that, again, growth's going to pay for growth, but there's just a little bit of timing that takes place when we have to make sure that who's paying for it initially, and then how do we get repaid. All of that is kind of factored in. And then the other kind of big takeaway is that consistent small annual rate adjustments is what we always like to recommend. It's generally more well received from a customer's perspective, and also sort of minimizes the long-term customer costs. So as we look at some of the recommendations, you'll see that we've got some minimal adjustments in there to kind of keep pace with, obviously, inflation is doing some strange things over the last year. We wouldn't expect that to hold for the long term, but we need to kind of begin to think about that.
Historically, 12 years without a rate increase, any kind of an increase is going to be a little strange to the system. So
certainly,
that's the political problem we have to face.
Of course, yep. So the big driver for the capital, or excuse me, for the financial plan are the capital needs. The district is fortunate that there is such an interest in developing and growing in the region, but that does come at a cost to make sure we've got the facilities in place to provide service to customers. So, looking out over the next 5 years, and our model looks out, I think it's a 10 or 15-year projection, but just showing on the screen here, we've got a little over $30 million of water needs. So some substantial investments there, and what you're seeing is how we, in our financial plan, have identified funding those projects. So you can see there's a good mix of cash, which is the green segment of those bars. We've got some grant money in there. Initially, I think that's some of the ARPA spending. And then we've got the yellow bars, which is a tax increment financing. So a number of these projects are related to key development corridors, and we know there's opportunity to pursue tax increment finance agreements, and so that's how those projects have been identified. What that means is that the district will pay for those projects either through cash or they may borrow, but they will be reimbursed through the TIF, and so that will theoretically cover the cost of those projects. And you'll see in a couple slides that we've got that built in, but we've assumed a little bit of a lag so that there is a period where the district needs to kind of make sure that we can support that until the development occurs and that tax revenue is being received. The sewer side of that picture is on the next slide here. We see, again, some very substantial costs, actually over $100 million over the next 5 years. Again, this is, where we're at today. This is certainly a very dynamic part of the puzzle. So I know that, CJ is kind of working on this literally on a day-to-day basis. So where we're at today, this is kind of what we see. Again, a major portion of these costs are anticipated to be funded and supported with different TIF agreements, which relieves the burden on the existing customers, relieves burden on customers in general because it's coming through that tax revenue. And you can see we've got a little bit more borrowing shown here on the sewer side, but there is some ability to kind of shift these things between the two, water versus sewer, given the district's structure. And then, this next slide I think is really important to the overall picture and how it all kind of comes together. And so this represents from a year-to-year basis what our cash needs are for supporting the capital program. When you look at the columns, the dark blue at the bottom, that's our existing debt obligations. That is continuing to decline as we would expect it to. We're paying off loans that we're currently holding. And we do see some, significant reduction in there over the next 10 years. It does, kind of cut in half, which is great. That frees up some capacity for some of our new projects to be added and not, strain the bottom line. And that's where you see the future debt is kind of the teal color, fills that gap, and then eventually around the 2029 period, kind of pushes us above where we're at right now. Additionally, we do show in our plan using capital or CIP pay-go, which is cash. We're using some of our existing cash and revenue that we'll be generating year over year to fund capital projects, and that's the green bar again. And the budgeted capital outlay, it's the same kind of thing, but those are smaller projects, or not projects, equipment, just minor repairs, that type of stuff. It's just hits the regular O&M budget. And then the TIF revenue, that's the yellow line that you see kind of coming into the picture, a few years down the road. So we've tried to be conservative with how that revenue will be received, and we've got a little bit of a lag from when the project is finished to when we begin to realize revenue from it, just recognizing that it takes a little bit of time before that development actually, occurs. But if you could kind of imagine and squint a little bit, the yellow line covers the bulk of that teal debt. So a lot of the debt we're incurring, the bulk of that is covered with the TIF revenue. So we have a source identified. The growth is going to pay for those projects. There's just a little bit of timing that we need to make sure the infrastructure has to be there before the development can be in place. And so that's what we're seeing.
You ran this out 10 years, so you're anticipating a 10-year TIF, or we just didn't run it out?
Just didn't run it out.
It goes.
It would look similar as it went on.
Correct.
Right, okay.
Correct.
And then the build out to 2026 is just the delay in the revenue generation. So if the projects are financed, is the interest is capitalized in the beginning then and carried through? Is that?
That's correct.
What we do?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and right now what we've got is that for the TIF projects, our model is assuming that they're going to we'll borrow for those projects and amortize that. I think there's flexibility where those could be cash funded as well. If we could switch the projects, and then that TIF revenue becomes, revenue that you don't have to immediately spend on the debt. So there's different options there. You could certainly swap projects between the sources.
Thank you. from 2026 to 2030, there's a lot of the cash payments in there.
Mm-hmm.
Just help me, where does that cash come from?
So that comes from what we have kind of in our coffers right now. We've got a healthy amount of cash currently. We're continuing to accrue a little bit, and we'll see it in a couple of slides when we look at the actual cash flow statement. I'll show you. But we've got funds available. We're going to continue to collect tap fees over the next few years, and then really in 25, 26, when the sewer plant's done, that's where we kind of have a lot of, we show more growth in our plan and more tap fees as a result of that. So that helps kind of boost the revenue as well. So, as I mentioned a few slides ago, based on the overall picture, we can maintain our strong financial position with some very minimal rate increases, going forward. We don't see the need for any kind of large initial adjustments. It just kind of nice and easy. We do see...
Which is different than what Park was, right?
Correct,
I
yeah.
just wanted to
Yeah.
emphasize that.
And that's where I think their approach sort of forced them to show that really large increase, where we recognize where you're at today, and you don't need to do that to kind of more smoothly build up to a different level. We do see though that the water system is being supported by sewer revenues. The sewer rates are higher, and we're generating some positive cash flow on the sewer system. And so focusing future increases on the water rates versus the sewer rates would be a recommendation of ours, just to try to balance that. Again, there's not a requirement that those have to be fully self-sufficient. Many of my clients kind of have that cross-subsidy where water supports sewer, sewer supports water. That is not an uncommon thing, and it can be really challenging to prove one way or another.
And explain.
Exactly. But that would be, again, as we look at rate increases, you'll see that we've got water at a higher level than sewer, and that's why. So from a graphical standpoint, this is the financial plan. The operating expenses, I've got a typo in that graph, I apologize, are the red component at the bottom of the chart. They're steadily increasing based on inflationary adjustments. We did kind of work through those line items. There are some that are increasing a good bit more than 2 or 3%. We've got insurance increasing, I think, at 8 or 9% per year clip based on recent bids that we've received. Other line items are more aligned with just cost increases that we have seen. Our existing debt is that dark blue again, and you can see it's becoming smaller, and the future debt is filling in some of that gap. And then our PAYGO capital is on top of it. The revenue is the yellow line, and what I'm sure you're noticing is that while our expenses are bigger than our revenues in a few of those years, why are we doing that? The reason is the cash reserves chart on the top right. We've got a strong, healthy balance of cash reserves above those target levels that we talked about when we were discussing our financial policies. And so what we're doing is we're actively kind of using that cash to balance our capital plan and to fund some of those capital projects. So you'll see on the next page, we have positive operating income. We're covering all of our operating expenses amply with our revenues. What we're doing is we're using our cash reserves to help reinvest in our system and to avoid borrowing for every project. And so we're bringing down that cash reserve over the few years. And so when you mentioned that we were, had a lot of it in 25, 26, 27, you can see we're bringing down that cash reserve balance in those years, but we're still staying above our target level with some cushion as well. And by avoiding borrowing for all these projects, what we're also doing, our debt coverage level, that's the 1.15 is the black line. We're kind of sending it up because we're not borrowing for all those projects. Again, just kind of adding some flexibility to the financials. So our sort of status quo scenario, and it's really hard to see on the screen here, I apologize. This is one of the handouts that I also gave you. And it's really hard to see in the top right corner. It does say status quo on one of those. No rate structure changes. This first page, which I don't know if it's a whole lot easier to see on paper than it is on the screen, kind of walks through that financial plan. You can see the revenue we have coming in, and then where we spend that money on our revenue requirements, our operating expenses, our debt. It shows us kind of those varying kind of cash flow metrics of our operating income, our cash flow before we start to invest in capital, and then the net system cash flow. And that's where you will see negative numbers in the net system cash flow. That's not a bad thing. That's again where we're actively using our cash reserves to pay for capital projects. But we're not doing that blindly. We're managing what our reserve position is, and we're managing kind of how leveraged the system is to make sure we're staying in a healthy position. This plan is supported by 2% annual rate increases on the water rates. The sewer rates are held constant over this 5-year period, 6-year period. And we have the TIF revenues coming in at that same kind of deferred rate we looked at before. Our capacity revenue that we have here is also fairly conservative. We haven't relied on the extraordinary kind of revenue we've seen the last couple of years. We are continuing to be conservative until we hit that 2025, 2026 time period. And at the very bottom, you can see sort of what a typical customer bill looks like. Right now, it's around $91.58. That's for 4,000 gallons per month. With those water rate increases, it does go up a little bit, but it's less than 1% per year. Anywhere from 57 cents to a little over $1 per month. So minimal rate increases. In working with staff, we knew that we wanted to explore potential alternatives to the rates, and are there different options to get to the same spot, but maybe change some of our rate structure. Particularly, we know that the debt elimination charge is something that we may want to look at removing. So we've got a couple of options to phase this out of the rate structure, and we've built it in as sort of a 4-year phase out. From its current $11.95, we've just sort of linearly taken it down to 9, 6, 3, and 0. It could be shortened. It could go away in 1 year, and we could make an adjustment to counter that. What we've done with our financial plans is that revenue that we had forecasted, the yellow line, is really where we want to be to support the long-term needs. And so as that kind of is reduced by the elimination of the debt charge, we want to balance that by adjusting the other rates a little bit to compensate for that. So we've got an option where we can, increase the other rates a little bit more. Instead of the 2% per year, maybe it's 4 or 5% on the water rates to balance. The other thing we've talked about is implementing a fixed capital recovery charge. And this is something that a lot of our clients are doing. Some call it a capital charge, some call it an infrastructure renewal charge. It functions similarly to the debt elimination charge, which I know is kind of, well, you're taking this one away and putting this one on.
It goes by any other name.
Right.
It's not a sweet, yeah.
But the truth of the matter is really that water and sewer service is incredibly capital intensive, and the costs that any utility has to incur just to be able to provide service are large, and they're also very fixed. They don't change very much whether customers use a lot of water or little water. Those pipes are out there, and they're getting older every day, and it takes a lot of money to replace them and keep them in good working order. And so when we think about from a concept basis, theory basis, it makes a lot of sense for utilities to have a strong fixed component in our rate structure, to recognize that we have a strong fixed component in our cost structure. And so you can see here, we've got an option where we replace the DE charge with this capital charge, and it's, again, more geared towards the water system to help with that subsidy from sewer. We get to a spot where it is lower, so, you know, $5 and $2 for a water and sewer capital charge, and these are kind of just the option that we've got. This is not the final recommendation. It has to be. There's some room here. That's still a savings to customers, and what we would kind of see through that.
I mean, I think one of the things that we talked about in our many meetings was that, you know, historically, I think the debt elimination fee was looked at covering past debt with current rates. Whereas thinking prospectively, all current rate users are essentially buying into future improvements on the current system. So, I mean, it is a charge, but philosophically, it's different. It's not meant to cover past. I mean, am I misstating what is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Sorry, I just wanted to.
No, that's great. No, and I think, yeah, you know, where we develop these, sometimes the charge is directly tied to recovering asset management costs that a utility's incurring on a year-to-year basis. So we're funding our asset management program through this charge. There's different ways to determine what the appropriate level is, but it is all sort of making sure we're funding current expenses. Absolutely. If we kind of go down this path, this graph tries to show how that typical customer bill, 9158, changes. So the first one was if we adjust the other rates, that's the green bar. So we slowly pull the DE off, but we increase our other rates to try to recover some of that lost revenue. And you can see you know, we stay in a strong financial position, and actually typical customers see a slight reduction in their bill for a few years. And in the second option where we implement this capital charge, there's a little bit of an increase for a couple years, but then again, the $7 that we got to on the prior slide is lower than what's currently charged at $11.95, so customers do receive a net benefit. Again, these are sort of a couple of options. You know, if there's a path that you know we want to explore and make sure that you know we're ready to put a hook to it, I think we want to specifically come up with, okay, they pick an option and we can come up with the rates, and so these numbers might shift a little bit, but sort of illustrative of how the impact works. And then to kind of put this in sort of frame of reference to our neighbors. With the district's rates, when we compare across other communities in central Ohio, for that same 4,000 gallon customer, you know, you are comparable to your peers, but you are on the higher side of this spectrum. That makes sense. You know, if you think about, you know, Columbus, the economies of scale that they have are extraordinary. Their costs are also extraordinary, but they've got millions of people to spread those costs over. It's a very different story here, and that's kind of what you see with Franklin County, is they've got a lot of cost and they don't have many customers. So, you know, with the district, really what we're seeing, especially with some of the growth cost, is an opportunity to get better economies of scale as we kind of grow and can more fully utilize the infrastructure that we have.
So I think one of the other things we talked about in this was just the relative size of the system too. I mean, I know you've talked about this, is that the number of lift stations, lines, things like that are significant compared to some of these smaller systems like Westerville or Reynoldsburg. So, I mean, just to throw that out there too, that some of our system costs are significantly different than some of those lower peers.
Absolutely.
We're probably one of the youngest systems on here too. They're all other established community water and sewer systems.
Great point.
If I'm not mistaken, these are all municipalities.
Franklin County is.
Franklin County is not, but it's substantially higher.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's
So they have other revenue streams.
some of them, most of them are enterprise funds, so they should be self-sufficient, but they've, got the backing of other, yeah. And I think that's an important element to all this, is that we have to be very careful when we're benchmarking rates. Just because your rates are higher or lower doesn't mean you are more efficient or more well-run, or, Fairfield County may not have reinvested in their infrastructure in the last 20 years and their system's crumbling. I don't know that if they're watching. It's not indicative of, it's not perfectly apples to apples. So just, frame it.
Snapshot
Yeah.
in time,
So that's the rate piece. I'll switch to the capacity fees, tap fees here, and get through that. So capacity fees, these go by number names: system development fees, impact fees, tap fees, which I know is named here. But they're one-time charges. We assess them to new customers for their use of the system capacity. And what we're trying to do is promote equitable recovery of the costs that were made by the existing customers to kind of have that capacity available. There's been numerous court cases to sort of challenge and validate these. And one of the key components is that the fees need to comply with what's known as the rational nexus test, where there's sort of three prongs to it. The need for those charges is a result of new growth. The amount of the charge doesn't exceed a reasonable cost to provide the capacity, and that those funds should be earmarked for the benefit of new customers paying the fee. So we want growth to pay for growth and to do so in a reasonable manner. We generally recommend that tap fees, capacity fees be reviewed every 5 years or so, just to make sure that it's still consistent with what the accounting information says it should be. Or after we make substantial changes to our system, adding 3 plants or huge pump stations, that can influence the calculation as well. Just so everyone's aware, right now, the current fees that are assessed to new customers from the district are shown here on this slide. We've got water and sewer fees. There's a tap fee and a capacity charge. And the difference is really the timing. So the capacity charge is when the parcel is platted, and then the tap fee is when the permits are submitted for construction. I think I got that right. I know I twisted it up 7 times in our conversations. But effectively, the total is sort of what we want to validate, because that's kind of the total cost of connecting into the system. And so for a typical residential customer, $6,400 on water, $7,800 on the sewer system. When we calculate fees, there's industry publications that offer guidance on the best ways to do this. And there's really kind of 2.5 approaches that are commonly used. First is a buy-in approach. That's where we look at, we have existing facilities, they've got enough capacity to meet new growth, and so people are just buying into what's already there. And we're looking at the fixed asset records and looking at existing capacity and coming up with a fee based on that. The other is more forward-looking, and we know we're going to make some big investments in the future, so we want to focus on those forward-looking costs and how much capacity those projects are going to add, and we develop a fee using that approach. And then there's the kind of half approach, the combined approach, where we're sort of in the middle. We've got capacity now that we can sell, and we're going to take credit for that, but we also are going to continue to make investments, and so we're going to have a piece of the forward-looking as well. We've gone through and updated these calculations for the district to cut to the end result here. The calculated fees that we're seeing show that the water tap fee could increase quite substantially from the $6,400 up to $10,400. The sewer charge is kind of right on target, right where it proved out to be, and you can see the combined there. This calculation is based on that buy-in approach from the prior slide. The reason we went with that is because the capital plan is so dynamic with the TIF funding and when that development is going to occur. there's a little bit of uncertainty around the magnitude of the project costs and when they're going to hit. And so what we want to avoid is including costs in a fee and then that project not being completed in the next few years, because then an argument can be made that we have artificially increased what our fee should be just to kind of collect it, and then we never did the work that we said we were going to do. So we want to be careful with that. And then also with the TIFs, since those have a separate funding source of the TIF, we wouldn't want to include those in the fee anyway, because then we're kind of double dipping. So to be conservative, we've used the buy-in approach, and that's the result that you're seeing here. And these would reflect not the fee that you have to charge. This is sort of the maximum cost justified fee. We recognize that there are other considerations when we establish tap and capacity fees. We want to promote growth. We don't want to sort of stall it out. So you don't have to charge the full amount if the district doesn't want to. This is sort of the level that we feel very confident that we could, if someone wanted to challenge it, we could take it in front of the courts and defend it. So looking at that, the calculated fees for water, we're exceeding the current charges. I just said this is the maximum cost justified charge. As we look down the list for larger meter sizes, I think there may be some opportunity to evaluate the residential and non-residential small meters. You can see that non-residential pay a little more than residential. Again, it kind of goes to the policies, and that's perfectly okay, but it could be something to consider. The other thing to consider is the ratios between the meter sizes. Typically, we recommend scaling those based on the hydraulic capacity of the meter. So a 6-inch meter can use a certain proportion more than a 3/4 inch meter, just based on how big that pipe is. And that difference is what we would usually recommend scaling the fees by. They're not in here. The current charges are generally below that hydraulic capacity, so there is a potential to, you could justify increasing the fees for larger meters based on that rationale. And there are other approaches that can be used where we look at specific design requirements of facilities and getting that, but it's a slippery slope. The wastewater side, the same chart is presented on the next one. Again, we can see our current charges are sort of right where they ought to be. But again, that small meter is something we may want to examine here. Make sure we're treating those customers consistently. And then finally, it's sort of, again, that benchmarking slide. And in the same way as the monthly rates, we can see that we are at the top of this comparison. Again, not an indication of anything wrong. We have validated and justified those fees, so they are wholly defensible. It's just kind of where you're at, and with the cost of providing service, we have a lot of facilities, a lot of geography to cover, and it costs a lot of money to make those investments.
CJ, when was the last time we raised those fees?
I believe it was in 2010.
Significantly, or 10%, 2%?
I don't know. I just remember the rate. I think it was in 2010.
Joe, how do the entities that are using Columbus Water and Sewer, I guess if Westerville does one but not the other, Gahanna, Reynoldsburg, are both fed off Columbus. So how are they just upcharging from what Columbus is charging since it's down there on the bottom?
I believe, I need to check the sheet to confirm, but I think they would pay both of those charges. Or sorry, it's the Columbus charges absorbed into Westerville, so the net, the delta between Westerville and Columbus is what Westerville's collecting for
Okay,
their local system.
gotcha.
So that's all the information that I have to kind of go over. Certainly open to any kind of discussions, comments.
Go back to that slide if you would.
Yeah.
On the Delaware one, because you did Delaware sewer, right? Is that
I was wondering that too.
including Delco water?
So that's Delco Water and Delaware
County
Sewer. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and again, you know, I know when a few of these folks have last kind of reviewed and updated their fees, because we help them do it, but I can't speak to everyone, you know, how recently they've been evaluated or if they have been evaluated.
Yeah. I'm just trying, I'm remembering back to when Delaware Sewer did their increase. And basically it was heavily weighted towards the tapping capacity as opposed to the monthly. And as I recall, I think that was, again, weighted towards putting it on the backs of the developers as opposed to the monthly users.
That's right, yeah, they were kind of similarly very high growing area.
Yeah.
So that,
Okay.
When you look at the methodology, the buy-in versus combined, based on at least my uninformed quick look here, the combined methodology would look like where we're at as opposed to the buy-in, because we don't have the capacity. I mean, the graph, at least on the backup documentation they have at the end of your presentation here,
yep.
looks just like where we're at right now.
Yeah, and it is, to be fair, you're not reading that wrong. The one kind of area where I think, just to be a little cautious, is that, again, the timing and how we're planning to pay for a lot of those road projects. Since we are anticipating entering into the TIF agreements to help finance those projects, we don't want to include the full cost in our calculation, so they would almost fall out. You know, you would put in 30 million, but then you take out 30 million because it's going to be grant funded or TIF funded. So it doesn't drive the calculation nearly as much as you think it might. And just with that uncertainty of the funding, and also when, you know, if it's going to hit in 2024, or maybe it'll take until 2026, just based on getting contracts in place. With those two things, my recommendation would be just to use the buy-in and then come back in 5 years and kind of hit the refresh button and see where it all shook out. We can circle back and sort of show you what that number looked like on the combined, so you're aware of it.
Joe, remind me, because I feel like this came up in our discussions. So didn't we have some sort of discussion and did sort of like some brief modeling when Wagram would come online, those new MGDs, and sort of how that, under the buy-in type modeling, would adjust these numbers going forward? So I mean, there is a way to account for future projects when they come online.
Yeah, when we calculated the combined approach, we have exactly what you said. There's, you know, again, just as we thought through the different elements, the buy-in, I think, was where we thought would be best right now. We can justify and still support the combined approach. The number will be a little bit different. And some of what kind of happens is
I guess ultimately my question would be, what does that what do the numbers look like, or what would that do to the numbers from an existing customer perspective,
Yeah.
right? Is the combined approach going to potentially be higher cost upfront for an existing customer, more cash outlay from the district's perspective, potentially? What does that difference in modeling look like? Where does the graph change?
Where we ended up when we kind of excluded the TIF projects, the combined approach actually slightly lowered the fee. So the per unit cost of the new development was lower than what the per unit cost is currently. So you're building more infrastructure on a per gallon per day that you can treat basis. The new stuff is actually less expensive than what's in place now. So when you put them together, it actually lowered the fee a little bit.
Gotcha. That's where my head was going, and I just needed to know which direction the arrow would point if you changed approach.
Right, and again, that's where I think, it's important, okay, recheck this, and I wouldn't, with how much is happening, I wouldn't wait 5 years, you can check it every 2-3 years and just make sure that all the math is still kind of working appropriately. Okay, well, I think, just to wrap up, our next steps, we'll be kind of working with CJ and Andrew to kind of finalize those rate recommendations and to kind of get that into a report form, submit it to staff and to y'all, and then deliver all of our work products over as sort of formal deliverables.
When do you anticipate that to be?
I think, by the end of June. We can get the recommendations sooner than that. I think the reports and all that, all the documentation, end of June, probably.
Okay.
We were looking to make action, but.
I know Kathy isn't here, but she did an awful lot for this. I mean, so I just wanted to say that
Thank you.
this would not have happened but for Kathy, and I know Josephine.
Yeah, absolutely echo. Kathy and Josephine were instrumental and very, very helpful at working with me and Amanda.
Mr. Evans, Mr. Van Buren, do you have any questions or enlightenments for us?
I just have a question. I noticed there's $51 million for the sewer plant and the water improvements outside the district up north. When those lines are run from wherever the sewer plant is, Alexandria or wherever, did any of your financing take into account of assessing any property owners on the way? Or are they not going to be assessed?
So, so if I recall, the slide, it was in yellow on your slide, correct? I think all these projects. So what the plan would be is for those townships or the county in the 161 corridor to TIF it and work with us on the repayment. It's similar to the plan in Union Township. So no, there would not be, the plan would be there would be no frontage assessment on the parcels, and there would be no cost to the rate users. The only thing that we sort of talked about and showed by that little chart is that there is a potential lag. So, there might be a few years of the debt carrying, but all the conversations we've had with the townships is the district would be made whole on that. So that would be a cost that would still not be passed on ultimately to the rate user. So the TIF is, that's how that would be financed.
Yeah, I just remember when the district was first set up and the lines were run up and down these roads, everybody was assessed. And I can see people down here saying, up there you're running lines in front of the properties to get up there, they don't have to be assessed.
That is true. I don't know if the assessment's the right thing, but they are paying for it through the TIF. So the TIF is the difference between and I may correct me if I'm wrong, the increment between the value of the property and the improvement. A portion of that gets put aside in the TIF. So that is a tax that is being paid by the property owner. It's just being diverted. So it's being paid, but it's being paid by the development, not a farmer that has and I know you know this, you can have a lot of frontage and you get assessed. So that didn't strike us as the right approach forward. The TIF would be, hey, I'm a developer, I'm coming in, I'm building, you know, a warehouse, I'm building a light manufacturing type thing. So that's how that would be paid for by the property owner.
Will the sewer plant go in before you have all these TIFs set up? Or are you gonna borrow the money, use cash, put the sewer plant in? And this, we can discuss it, I don't wanna drag this on.
And I think we're still to be determined. I mean, we haven't executed a TIF agreement.
Sure,
with-
that's what I'm saying, because what I'm seeing is, you got, your debt's getting cut clear down, and then when you start doing a lot of improvements outside of the district, your debt's picking up, and the residents in this district is now on the hook for that, hoping you have customers outside the district.
Well,
And that's a big concern, because you're taking cash. For instance, the water line going up on 161. We were told before that was not going to be put in unless somebody's writing a check for it. I think you have one customer up there and use cash to run that line out.
it still hasn't been put in on Worthington Road.
Is it up to Colin yet? Then it is there.
Yeah, but it's not down.
Yeah, but it still costs to get up there. Same thing with Union Township. I just have one other question.
No, so I mean,
Yeah.
and CJ could help answer this. I do believe part of the plan of that was the water tower. And the water tower has actually helped to facilitate Harrison Township. So it does potentially serve multiple purposes. But I'm happy to talk to you and I about it. I mean, the plan ultimately is, when the way that we would approach these TIF and JET agreements would be, the project is going to be 100% funded through those mechanisms, so that no, those costs, even any sort of debt carrying costs, and there's a question about sort of being capitalized and all that sort of stuff, would be repaid. So no, there would be no cost.
I guess my concern is the infrastructure is put on, hoping there's development. And then interest rates go up another 2% or 0.5%. A lot of stuff's put on hold. Now we spent our cash and now we gotta make debt payments. That's a big concern. And then one other quick question. Are you planning on surcharging for water service outside of the district? For instance, Harrison Township, Beechwood Trails, and River Forest pays 50% higher than the city of Pataskla. Are you going to do the same thing to the residents and the people outside this district?
So the only agreement that we have to serve outside the district that, I mean, loosely commits us to doing it is the Lorraine. So that in Union Township, those folks would pay the inside the district rates. So there would be no difference.
And to me, I think there should be a surcharge, and the reason why, the residents of this district, Harrison, Pataskla, and Old Lyman Township, or city of Pataskla, they put a lot of money in this. And this is an economic tool, okay, for development. Now you're running water at the same cost down to Luray, and now that interchange can compete with Etna, Kirkers, or Harrison Township at Kirkersville. And to me, that's not fair to the residents. The residents built this system, and they should be able to get the best benefit out of it. And if you're going to go outside the district now, not assess people going by their places, and sell it at this rate, I don't think it's right.
Well, the relief is at the higher volume too, so we share the cost with other
It's-
customers.
Yeah, but if you did that surcharge, those lines would change. It's just, it is. You're taking the cash to make improvements where most of those improvements are made outside of this district, if you look at the charts.
Yes, but the reason we broke it out the way that we did is if these funding mechanisms don't come into place, then it won't happen.
Right.
So for example, we've been having a different discussion with Aetna and some of the other partners saying, hey, these are the projects that we need to help facilitate growth and development and maintaining the system in your township. So those are.
I understand that.
So the 161 stuff and those sorts of things, if those don't have the funding, and the board can correct me if I'm wrong, but as I think CJ and I understand it, with the idea that development pays for development, that if there's not the funding mechanism there, those projects won't go forward. They won't be put on the backs of the rate users. Did you want to say something, Joe, or I thought you were.
Yeah, I think, that's what I remember our discussion as well, that, all of these, or the TIF projects, without that financing mechanism, they wouldn't, so they would kind of just fall out of the plan and then it's a net.
So would you, and you're in a tough situation, do you put the plan in hoping? Or do you wait till there's 10 businesses making a commitment and then you build the plant and hope you get it done quick? I don't know. Then one other quick thing. I'm also a believer that if you go outside, and I'm gonna talk about the village of Kirkersville and Harrison Township, there's development that the village of Kirkersville is gonna have, and I'm pretty sure developers have talked to you about sewer. I believe that sewer shouldn't come out of this district unless they detach and go to Harrison Township. It's the same thing as cities. Cities usually provide services if you annex, because that's an economic tool for our township. So, and we can talk later, but those are my concerns.
Oh, anytime, Mark.
Yeah, well, I want to talk to the board. They make decisions.
Any other questions for our time is just about up, so if there are any questions, we'll be happy to take them, but if not, I think we will wait for trustee comments and subsequently adjourn. Trustee comments? Okay, well, it gives us a lot to think about, and I would say a decision in June or July will probably be on our plate. Motion to adjourn?
Second.
Please call the roll.
Mr. Step?
Yes.
Mr. Platt?
Yep.
Mr. Pitzman?
Yes, this meeting, special meeting is adjourned. Are we
Recording.
all turned on?
I'm turning on.
But you... Okay, I would like to call this regular meeting of the Southwest Licking Community Water and Sewer District to order. Please call the roll.
Mr. Step?
Here.
Mr. Platt?
Here.
Mr. Pitzman?
Here, we'll forego the pledge because we've already said it. We have an agenda before us. Are there any changes, corrections, additions to it? I'll move to approve it as presented then.
Second.
We have a motion and a second by Mr. Platt. Would you please call the roll?
Mr. Step?
Yes.
Mr. Platt?
Yes.
Mr. Pitzman?
Yes. The minutes of the May 11th special meeting with Union Township, the minutes of the May 12th audit finance meeting on the 12th, the regular meeting on the 12th, and the May 19th special meeting are all subject for approval. Do we have any changes to any of them, or would you like to approve them all separate, together?
Move to accept them together.
I'll second that motion. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Step?
Yes.
Mr. Platt?
Yes.
Mr. Pitzman?
Yes, all the minutes were approved as presented. I'll make a motion to pay the bills as presented.
Second.
And a second by Mr. Step to pay the bills as presented. Any discussions or questions on any of the bills we're paying? Please call the roll.
Mr. Step?
Yes.
Mr. Platt?
Yes.
Mr. Pitzman?
Yes, pay the bills. Do we have any communications?
No?
No communications? Do we have any public comments? We did general manager's report.
Got a resolution to approve advertisement for bids on the National Road well fields number 7, 8, and 9 project that is for the drilling of wells 8 and 9.
Excuse me, it says 7 and 9.
That's the project name, but,
Okay.
because it's a project as a whole.
Gotcha, very good, thank you. I'll move resolution number
44.
44. To approve the advertisement for bids on the National Road project as presented.
Second the motion.
We have a second by Mr. Platt. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Step?
Yes.
Mr. Platt?
Yes.
Mr. Kurtzman?
Yes, resolution 044 is approved.
Got a resolution to approve the Southwest Lakeland Community Water and Sewer District, Fairfield County Utilities, and Jefferson Water and Sewer District emergency sale of potable water agreement. This is the same agreement that's been signed, I believe, the last 2 years to help support Jefferson Water and Sewer District. Fairfield County, in essence, would serve water into the district's infrastructure. The district would take that water, transport it, and send it to Jefferson Water and Sewer District. It's the same agreement. Mr. King has reviewed it and did not have any issues.
Did the rate change?
The rate did not change.
This is emergency only water that goes straight from Fairfield through us to Jefferson, or do we supply our own emergency?
Correct, yeah, typically what happens is the district supplies the water first, and then once the district fulfills the contract or cannot support because of our use, then the valve per se gets opened from Fairfield County. We transport it to Jefferson.
Remind me the term of.
This is a 1-year agreement, or 4-month agreement.
4-month agreement.
Yeah, it's basically through the summer.
Emergency.
Through today, starting today, is that? Or date of
April the 15th, I
execution?
think, or May the 15th, I don't know, something like that. I have to look at the agreement, but it's a 4-month agreement.
The intent is to get them through the hot months of the summer due to.
Through their high use
excessive-
periods,
Have
correct.
we sent them any water under this agreement?
I'm sorry?
Have we sent them any water under this agreement?
Not yet, no.
So.
Not this year.
Not this year.
We did last
We did last year, year
Yes.
before, under the same terms of a different agreement, but yes.
Did we need to pull water from Fairfield?
We did. Yep.
Okay, resolution 045 to approve the Southwest Lakeland, Fairfield County, and Jefferson Water and Sewer District emergency sale of potable water agreement. I'll move resolution 045.
Second.
Mr. Platt seconds. Any more discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Step?
Yes.
Mr. Platt?
Yes.
Mr. Kurtzman?
Yes, 045, resolution to transfer emergency sale of potable water agreement is approved.
I've got another resolution. I'm sorry, I missed it. I was distracted on the approval agenda if the board so chooses to allow me to present.
I don't believe there's any objection to adding it to the agenda as a general manager's report, so we'll accept your proposal if you'll tell us what it is.
I've got a resolution to amend the agreement with AECom Technical Services for the Pataskil Corporate Park and surrounding areas sanitary sewer project. This is for an additional line extension from Etna Parkway to Main Street along Broad. This is to facilitate issues found in the CM Smith report regarding capacity issues along Refugee Road. In essence, this sewer extension makes it available for us to transfer flows from the Main Street area north of Broad to the Licking Heights High School into the Corporate Park sewer, thus removing it from Refugee Road sewer.
And this, I remember the need for this, but correct me if I'm wrong in that the ability to do this was that the JRS sewer was large enough to be able to handle the additional capacity, but that was, how would you say, a fortunate happenstance or a fortunate byproduct, if you will, of the elevations and the need to upsize the pipes to be able to flow the JRS site, so unintended benefit maybe?
Absolutely, and the other benefit is, you know, the JRS site will eventually flow to Wagram, so those flows are accounted for, so.
Cool.
And take it off the Gale Road facility, which in essence, frees up more capacity again.
Benefits to all.
Correct.
I'm fine with it.
That is for an additional $48,000 for a total not to exceed $397,152.80.
Amendment 46,
Yes.
motion to approve resolution 2022-046 as presented.
Second.
We have a motion and a second by Mr. Platt and Mr. Stepp. Do we have any more discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Step?
Yes.
Mr. Platt?
Yes.
Mr. Kurtzman?
Yes. Resolution 046 is approved.
One other just quick mention that the York Road entrance will be closed down this weekend and the entrance from Zellers will be opened up. They are doing pavement sealing on the new asphalt for the water treatment facility, so those will be transferred back on Monday, just so everyone's aware. So. Correct. Other than that, the financial officer wanted me to present the draft budgets to the board, so those are for your guys' review. If there's not any questions, that's all I have.
Very good. Office manager's report?
I have a resolution to certify delinquents to the county auditor.
How many do we have? I didn't see that.
I think it was 42 was the number.
I'll move resolution 047 to certify delinquents to the Working County Auditor.
I'll second.
Mr. Stepp seconds my motion. Any more discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Step?
Yes.
Mr. Platt?
Yes.
Mr. Kurtzman?
Pregnant pause. Yes. Resolution 047 is approved.
And then there's a copy of the water shut-off list. We had 4 people shut off yesterday. 3 of those have been turned back on. I think the remaining one is available.
Is that still being subsidized? Are people still getting money for that?
We are not offering, I mean, there for a while we were doing, we were not doing shut-offs and not charging late fees, but I know there's still some funds available through, I think, Job and Family Services to help people with their utility bills, yeah.
Very good. Anything else from the office manager?
No, that's all I have.
Thank you. Attorney's report?
Well, I think the one thing I just kind of want to go over is the MOU that I've got some signatures back on. So just sort of want to talk about it generally and march through it, and then if the board is inclined to give authority to the chair to sign it. So as everyone might remember, the lift station project at Refugee and 310, that there's already, I think everything except maybe JBW is zoned at the various stages of approval through preliminary through planning. So to bring these developments online, the lift station needs to be improved. It's roughly a $2 million improvement. And the way that we approached this project was as a public-private partnership. There is a TIF on a few of the parcels, and they're going to use that in addition. So just kind of marching through, what you'll see the first page there is the properties that will be subject to this, and then it goes on to talk about what I just said. And then if you turn to page 2, you'll see the chart where we took the $2 million the district had originally had $300,000 in.
I don't think I have it.
I don't think I have it either.
It's right beside you.
Oh, you just handed it to us.
I have it. It is.
Without drawing attention to it?
You were talking, so
Oh,
I
really?
didn't want to disrupt
Can't
you.
talk and listen at the same time. That's
Two gentlemen.
Okay, thank you.
So if you just 1.7 is kind of where I'm at. So just to refresh the board's memory, this was a $2 million project. Originally, the capital improvement plan had slated $300,000 because at that point, they weren't necessarily planning on building a new one with additional capacity. So that left about 1.7 million. We decided to assess the surcharge based on the ESFU that each unit would use, and that was based on a single family unit for each one. So you can see that 2,002 per ESFU is what was assessed here. You'll see in 1.8, for some reason there's an overage that it would, if you go to Wagram or other regional type flow improvements. And then just kind of real broadly through each, as you might recall, each development had different issues here. AMH is the one that will be building the lift station. They will build it and then they can tap right into it. They will be doing a sewer extension that runs down to the Langle parcel, and they'll be upsizing it. Langle and the JBW parcel across the street will build the relief sewer. I think their plan is to use the TIF funds for that. And then at the north, Rockford, and I'm doing this from partially my memory, so jump in, CJ. Rockford had some issues that, they were given a couple options on how to proceed. So like a 2.7, it talks about when they can go and what the prerequisites are. So, what we talked about is in 2.8 is if there's any left over of the TIFs, and if the township is amenable to it, and we would potentially use those TIF dollars towards the Wagram plant or other system upgrades to that. And then in 3, you'll see, this is a non-binding MOU. This was essentially to put, the intent of this, and it took months, was to put all the developers on the same page, make sure everybody knew who was building what, when they were essentially doing it, what the district's contribution was, what the prerequisites of folks going were. And then, you'll see that on the subsequent pages, we have signatures from David Hodge, Robert Yoakum for Rockford Homes, Matt Callahan for Pulte JBW, and then we've got AMH, which is Michael Medvikoff. So I am going to meet with Sheets tomorrow, I believe. And they're the owners, I think, of all the subsequent KNC properties. So, they may voluntarily sign on to this, and I'll have follow-up conversations with RJ and Ron about where they're at on it. But, the way that we indicated is that everybody in the region, this is a regional improvement, tributary improvement, they're going to be assessed it. So we're going to adjust the rate and fee schedule to make sure everyone pays it. It's not you opt out and you avoid it, everyone's going to pay the surcharge. So does that sound correct, CJ, or did I miss anything?
At this point, it's an MOU. Is there a point where everybody is obligated?
So the first up, I think, will be the AMH development agreement. They are building the lift station. I think their attorney, who's with Isaac Wiles, and I have sort of exchanged drafts. I think there's one last sticking point. So I hope to have it at this meeting, but hopefully the next meeting. And then as each development gets through planning, we'd have a development agreement come through. So I think Rockford conceivably would be the next one after AHS, but they are on the taskless side, but they still tie into the system. So
Double bogey is a Lano family.
that is correct.
CJ,
It's that property, it's not the family.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
this is your recommendation?
It says Lano
Subject
family
to-
on page 1.
Yeah, I believe this needs to happen to make these approvals possible, so, yes.
So the next document would be where the district would, I think that's the most significant obligation of the district is when it executes the development agreement with AHS. They'll post a bond for the entire lift station project, so the district will have coverage if for some reason they go belly up or whatever. and then they would front the cost of it. They'll do the construction, they'll demolish the old lift station, and I think they're gonna give us the land too for the new lift station, and put it in a slightly better location, less dangerous location. And then, you know, we would reimburse them through TAP credits, and then as other development happens, the surcharge comes in, so this ends up being, again, sort of the board's general direction. It will not be a cost borne by the current customers, it's development paying for development.
Essentially, if I'm understanding this correctly, this MOU is sort of an agreement, if you will, that this is what the plan is for everyone involved.
Yep.
We will change our fee schedule to include the $2,000 surcharge or assessment. And each time somebody wants to tap into this system, that is when that will happen, which will eventually cover the cost in its entirety of, once it's fully built out.
Correct, and the way that we did it as a capacity surcharge, so that's paid at the time the development agreement's executed, so it was all to minimize the risk to the district on it. So basically, worst case scenario, I guess, if we're trying to bottom line it, is that AHS will build it, we'll give them TAP credits, so a worst case scenario, it becomes sort of a neutral thing where we didn't receive any revenue for that particular development. But the surcharge
For the
keeps,
project.
correct. Long term, the surcharge keeps the TAP fees whole, so again, no one's getting an advantage, no one's getting a discount, everyone's paying their freight on this.
So the million-dollar question, right, is how many of these units, which they're all residential, correct? There's some commercial.
Other than sheets.
There's some commercial on the JBW as well, the out parcels for that. There's primarily single-family residential or
Commercial
or
residential.
or commercial residential.
Correct.
At what point in this series of projects do we run out of capacity? We don't have the capacity for this entire set of.
We don't.
At the
Good.
at the
This is
plant,
a you question.
at the plant,
If nothing else happens, yes, we
we do have capacity for this
do, for the 852.
if these are the next developments that occur within the parameters of our district.
Correct. Not accounting for anything else that's happened.
But there's other things in flight that may cause capacity issues for this. So there is no guarantee of capacity. There is nothing in the MOU that says that there will be capacity available at such time as.
So 2.4. And again, this is non-binding, but the district shall reserve and provide water and tap connection fee credits to AMH development for 172 units. So that's the one place where this is going to deviate from standard board practice was with AHS, because they are taking the risk.
Because they're taking the risk up front, so we're making sure that they have capacity for a certain number of units.
Correct.
If I'm not mistaken, from 2019, there's also, TNR has 19 or 20
Correct, it's 20 units.
units as well,
Correct.
that the district has already agreed to allow.
Correct.
So that's essentially 192 total in that development area that we're talking about in the MOU. So 200.
That sounds reasonable.
Thank you. We have executive session on this next item on the agenda.
Was that my cue?
That was your cue.
Let me look. I will move to enter into executive session pursuant to Ohio Revised Code 121.22G1 To consider the appointment, employment, dismissal, promotion, demotion, or compensation of a public employee or official, as well as pursuant to Ohio Revised Code 121.22G3 for conferences with an attorney for the public body concerning disputes involving the public body that are subject of pending or imminent court action.
I'll second.
Invited into those meetings?
Invited into those meetings. For the G1, it will be the 3 board members, the interim general manager. If the chief legal counsel is needed, they'll be invited into a later time as well. The G3 will be with the board members, the chief legal counsel, and the law firm,
Tier Westfall.
Teeter Westfall, thank you.
I'm pretty sure it's Tier Westfall.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Stubb?
Yes.
Mr. Platt?
Yes.
Mr. Kurtzman?
Yes, we are now in executive session.
Where would you like to hold this?
Jimmy, make it easy for you guys, I can just go out until you guys are done, I can shut the camera off.
That'll work.
All right.
That was needed.
All systems go.
Oh, that's fine.
Yep, I'm good.
I'll move to come out of executive session.
I'll second.
Mr. Stepp seconds my motion to come out of executive session. Please call the roll.
Mr. Stubb?
Yes.
Mr. Platt?
Yes.
Mr. Kurtzman?
Yes, we are now in regular session.
For the record, there were no decisions made nor actions taken while in the executive session.
Anything else to come before the board?
Under trustee comments, the district has a need to fill an open position, so I would propose a motion to authorize the general manager to post for the wastewater system operator 2 position,
Minimum.
minimum of class 2 certification. That is my motion.
I'll second.
Mr. Stepp seconds Mr. Platt's motion. Any more discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Stubb?
Yes.
Mr. Platt?
Yes.
Mr. Kurtzman?
Yes, our motion is approved. Proceed, Mr. General Manager.
Yes, sir.
The only thing I wanted to add under additional comments, you know, I think we'll come to some decisions on the rate study and digest all that and stuff. I just wanted to, there were questions earlier, and I just wanted to be extremely clear that this board has been very open and transparent and very clear that the development will pay for development. So whether it's the previous method of assessment or where we've been creatively working with community partners to implement revenue mechanisms to pay for the extensions and the additional improvements to the district system, that will be the only way that I would support moving forward, and that's the direction we've been going. So I believe if I'm understanding the rate study correctly, that it has been incorporated into that. So I think that's important that we call that out and make that clear that that is the continued direction the board is going, in that the current customers are not going to be saddled with additional costs that are the direct result of additional development because this new development is coming. So it's important to me, and I think that's been the direction of the board, and I continue to support that. Other than that, I have no comments. Thank you.
Mr. Stepp?
I'll just piggyback back on what Mr. Platt said just a little bit. Although I agree with what he said, and we've, I think as a group, demonstrated that over the last year plus. There were also some questions earlier in our special meeting earlier in regards to you know, some of the work that we're doing, or agreements we're making potentially on the edges of our established district. But we also heard during that meeting that sometimes the size of a district can allow a district to essentially recognize some efficiencies of scale. So as we are able to get a little bit larger, we can then potentially even retain or keep rates as low for existing customers as possible. So at least from my perspective, there's no desire to become a Goliath district. However, you know, truly capitalizing on some of the efficiencies that we could get by being a little bigger seem to make some sense. And when it does make sense, I typically tend to be in agreement with that, or at least gather more information in that regard. So I think that's all I have, Mr. President.
Very good, thank you. Any other comments? I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Platt moves, Mr. Step seconds, motion to adjourn, please call the roll.
Mr. Step?
Yep.
Mr. Platt?
Yes.
Mr. Peckman?
Yes, we are adjourned.